Hey, so today I'm going to show you the Fields Alpha Preview, everything from how to install it and get the software up and running for your first stream into virtual reality, but as well as how to use the software, some potential useful tips and tricks, and some other things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're unfamiliar with Fields, Fields is a prototype digital mixing console that I'm developing that is a fully digital on-computer mixing console designed for doing immersive panning and immersive acoustics simulation specifically for virtual reality broadcasting. And this opens up a bunch of really cool doors to potentially do things like having instrumental performances inside of virtual reality with the full acoustics support, as well as you could do all sorts of other things and whatnot. So Fields is designed to run on a singular computer and have audio piped in and out of it via like a mixing console, via Dante, or potentially through Wave SoundGrid. But for this specific release, I've optimized it for running a full broadcast pipeline specifically on just a computer, which is kind of the really cool thing about it. So let's go ahead and get into the downloads. So the first thing you're going to want to do is, if you go to my Patreon page, you can get to it with the link, right here. If you go to my Patreon page, there will eventually be a little thing that'll pop up here for downloading the software in its full completion. Also, if you want to join the Discord in case you have any questions on setup as well as any feedback on this preview release. The next thing that you're going to need is what's called Jack Audio Connection Kit. This is going to be for connecting all of the softwares together so that you can create a broadcast pipeline that is all specifically on your computer. This is the cheapest and easiest way to do it. Cheapest meaning that it's free. You just go to the downloads and install the 64-bit version for Windows. The next thing that you're going to potentially need is the ASIO for All ASIO driver. In order to run the software, you need an ASIO driver to run the master clock from. Most people already have an ASIO driver on their computer if they have an external audio interface, but if you don't have an ASIO driver anywhere on your computer, you can download the official ASIO for All, which is just a generic ASIO driver. The other thing that you're going to need to set up the broadcast pipeline is the ASIO plugin for OBS Studio. This is going to allow us to be able to pipe multi-channel audio into OBS. And of course, you're going to need some kind of streaming support. So if you want to stream this live into virtual reality, into something like VR chats, you're going to need a content delivery system. I use VRCDN. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to need to open a File Explorer window and configure Jack after you have it installed. So we're going to go to the local disk, Program Files, Jack 2, where is it? Jack Router, Windows 64, and there's this configuration files that we're going to open. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. Windows likes to be a little annoying, so I'm going to copy this and then stick it on my desktop. And I'm going to open this file, and by default, it's going to tell you these input and outputs are 2. You're going to want to change them to either 8 or 16, depending on how many channels you want to configure to run into Fields. 16 is going to be the maximum for this specific release. Once you have that completed, just drag it back into this file and tell it to replace the file in the destination. Go ahead and click Continue, and there we go. After you've configured that, then we're going to open QJack Control. This guy right here, this is how you open it. And QJack is Audio Connection Kit, so when I hit the Start button, it's going to actually start a server on my computer that allows me to pass audio between applications. We're going to go to Setup and configure our ASIO driver. I usually use a solid-state logic, but for today I'm going to be using ASIO for All because I have Capture running to do this screen recording. Sample rate needs to be 48K. You need to have a frame period or a buffer size of 512, and you want to check this little box that says Use Server Synchronous Mode. Go ahead and save your settings, and we're going to exit out of this, and we're going to go ahead and start Jack. Once it's started, you'll see whatever driver that you picked, it's going to show the inputs and the outputs of that specific driver, including the MIDI control. The next thing that I'm going to open is the Arc Fields preview. So inside of the Arc Fields file folder, there will be an application. I'm going to go ahead and open this, and it's going to take a couple seconds for it to do that. It also is going to make some sounds in the background that potentially might be loud as it figures out what the ports need to be changed for in the server. That's just kind of a thing that happens with audio connection kit that you have to deal with. So now that this is open, I'm going to open the I/O configurations on Arc Fields, and we're going to go into the driver and we're going to select Jack Audio Router. It's going to make some loud noises as it populates the 16 inputs and outputs. And on here, make sure that you have schedule and overdrive turned on and audio interrupt turned on, or set your sample rate to 48K. Your I/O vector size should be at 512, and set your signal vector size as well at 512. Now, after that is configured, go ahead and click the Start button. And you'll notice that on my particular computer, we're running at about 50%. This is not actually CPU usage, this is DSP usage. And you can also see on the Jack router that we're using about 50% of our DSP, our total DSP headroom usage. Over here, it'll automatically populate some connections. These connections you don't actually need, but I'm not going to worry about them now. I'm going to open up the piece of software I'm going to pipe into Arc. There we go. So now that I have Rekordbox open, I'm just going to go to my file preferences. Oh, it's already set at Jack router. Sweet. 48K. We've got our output channel set. Awesome. And now that this is all running, we also want to, you're going to want to open up OBS. I'm currently doing the screen recording on OBS, but what you'll want to do here is you want to add an ASIO input capture like this. I'm going to choose the Jack router, and then I'm going to add just like that. And now this is going to look a little broken for me because I'm doing a screen recording. This will, once you have this set up correctly, you'll actually see 6 bars here for the 6 inputs into OBS, but it doesn't show that for me because I'm doing screen recording. So now on this page, there's going to be a bunch of things that have populated. A lot of these connections we don't want, so I'm going to delete them. I don't really care about what's coming in from my input capture device or what is going to the system. Now you also noticed that OBS is not showing up in this window, and the reason why is because, again, I'm doing screen recording, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the outputs of Rekordbox and route it into the Arc Fields Alpha Preview. And on your screen, you will have another box here that describes OBS, and you're just going to want to route inputs 1 through 6 into the inputs of OBS ASIO. But I can't do that at this particular moment. So now that this is routed and all the applications are open, one thing to check before we start doing stuff here is this little number right here. Again, so I have about 60% headroom on my DSP usage. If you're running it anywhere from like 80 to 90 to 100, once you hit 100%, it's actually going to cause the audio to clip and make a bunch of weird noises, which is what you don't want to do. If that's happening, make sure to close any background programs that might be using your ASIO driver or your audio kernel use. So now that we have this all set up, I'm just going to go ahead and load up some audio here and play it. Audio is playing, and you'll notice that now I have audio coming into the Arc Fields engine because I have it connected here. Now, let me introduce you to the interface. So on this interface, we have input channel routing, so I can actually route any inputs to pretty much any channel I want in here, as well as I can delete any of these. The decoder, I'm going to unmute the first decoder so that we have audio pass through, and by default the only selection right now is just Dolby 5.1. If we go, I'm also going to click this link button right here, and I'll explain what the link button does later. If we go to the mix page, you'll see on the mix page that we have an input gain adjustment, a channel identifier. There's also a parametric EQ and the panning window. Note that all of this stuff down here does not work. I had to rip it out of the software in order to give enough headroom so that you'd be able to run this alongside of other pieces of software. So on the panning window, because I have this linked, this link button is going to allow me to I can grab this little icon here and I can pan it around. And what this is going to do is this is going to take your object and it's going to pan it around it's going to pan it on your horizontal axis in 360 degrees in virtual reality. But it's going to be extremely dry, and then as you push it out farther from the center of circle, what it's going to do is it's going to put more energy into the acoustic enhancement engine. So the acoustic enhancement engine you can find on the Engine and FX page. You can change the size of the hull. There are a bunch of sliders on here that you can't interact with because they are not connected or set up currently. This is a preview release again. You're going to have a pre-delay section. This pre-delay delays the entire system, and then the spatial pre-delay this delays things progressively from where your sound source is placed through the room. So if I'm set this to 0 and 30, that means that if my sound is placed over here, I'm going to have a 0 time delay in the acoustic enhancement engine, and progressively it's going to get longer until in the back of the room I have a delay of 30 milliseconds. So the next thing I'm going to show you before I explain this section is if I click this button right here, which is fader control, it's going to open up the fader control window. The fader control window is how you select what channel you want to be looking at on the mix page. So if I go to the mix page and I select kind of around, you'll see that the little icon's changing. I'm going to go to channel 1. And if I grab this, they will both, whoops, my audio needs to go back to playing. There we go. If I pull this up and down, you'll see that I have audio playing now. Now these video meters in the bottom, what they represent is the green meter is your dry send and this is your wet send. So if I come in here and I pull this towards the center, you'll see that I only have green, and if I pull it towards the outside, you'll see that I only have wet send, which is going to the acoustic enhancements engine. So if I go back to the enhancement engine, you'll see that there's now VUs being displayed in here. Now the object relative spatial bias has to do with how the energy is perceived across your field. So let me go ahead and grab this object. I'm going to place it at the 0 point. If I jump back over here, this allows you to change how much energy is coming from the relative direction of your sound source. So if I turn this up and down, you'll notice that I get more reverb in the rear of the space. And if I turn the front one up, it's going to change how much is coming from the front of the space. And then the laterals is pretty much your general, this is your 90 degree lateral energy. So usually what I do is I have my rear energy all the way up and I turn this up a little bit. And the reason why this is so fancy named object relative spatial bias is because this actually depends on where you place your sound source. So right now you'll notice all the reverb's coming from the back of the room. My sound source is placed up here. If I go back to my mix engine and I put my sound source down here and go back to engine effects, now the reverb's coming from the front of the room because my object is positioned down here. I'm going to go like this. So to fill out the space a little bit, I'm going to add a little bit of lateral energy as well as some frontal energy. This giant notch filter exists because the impulse response set has a resonance at this frequency, and it just sounds a lot better when I put it that way. Now, you can do a lot of things with fields. In fact, one thing that you could do is you could open an instance of Reaper. Oops, Reaper. There we go. Here's a multi-channel recording from MagFest that I have set up to route into, let me set this to jack. It's going to take a little second to occupy. I'm going to go 16 outputs. I'm going to request block size. We're going to hit OK. And then let me play this. Yeah. If I go down here to my output routing configuration, I'm going to route a multi-channel source of 16 channels. And then I'm going to come over here. Whoops, I forgot. Reaper's weird. You have to let it play in order for it to show up. I'm going to delete these guys. And then I'm going to route these channels into fields. I'll just do 6 for now. Now that I have these routed into fields and my audio is playing, once I pop over here, you'll notice that all my audio is now coming into the engine. And now that it's coming into the engine, I can pop in here and go to some of these channels and bring them up. I can also select these channels and I can pan them in various places as needed. And of course, there is no audio. You're not going to be hearing any audio because it's not really possible for me to do the recording of the audio all on one computer, unfortunately. But on your computer, what you can do is you can just take outputs 1 and 2 and link it to your main speaker outputs, so then you can hear kind of what's going on. So now that we got a mix going on here, you can come in here and you can, type whatever. This could be like your hi-hat. You can also click the channel identifier and change the color of your channel so that it's easier to see. And when you have linked channels like this one, if you select your identifier here, we'll actually change the color of both the channels as well. Just like that. And we have that all the way up to 16 channels of control. Note that when you go to 17 through 32, there isn't going to be anything that shows up on the mix page because I had to remove the second set of 16 channels because there wasn't enough DSP power. Your field section, if you select a channel and you attach it to a field group, this fader will now act as a DCA. So the outputs of whatever channel that you have connected to a field group, it will now scale the output of whatever you have set on your main fader control. If you go to the masters, this is a master control for the reverb. You can give more or globally more or less reverb from your system. You can control the master output. You can control the LFE output as well as the monitoring output. So if I go back to the I/O configurations and move these faders, you'll notice that it actually is just adjusting those volume controls. And you want to make sure that you're not blasting out your, you don't want red. If you see red in here, you're going to have problems. There's going to be clipping issues as it comes through your software into OBS. The LFE, you can set a low pass frequency. This is for specifically the low frequency output for like 5.1. You don't actually need to use this because by default, the way that the encoding works, it's putting the full range content into here. But if you'd like to add the LFE, you can do so by adjusting the volume level here, the low pass frequency level, and you can also adjust the Butterworth filter order. This is all going to get changed once we get to the final version, but for now it's just, whatever. You'll notice in here that there are 2 decoders. These 2 decoders are fundamentally pretty different, and they sound a little different. I'm not going to get into the reasons why they sound different, but one thing you might want to try out is just the difference in how these may sound against one another. And you can just reroute them in here, but one thing I would recommend is instead of, using outputs 1 through 6, just use outputs 7 through 12. And then just route them into your OBS window, and then you should see, the meters pop up. Because the way that this is routed, it looks a little weird, but what this is this is the ITU standard for 5.1, so that when it's received inside of VRChat or inside of Unity, it'll know what to do with the channels. So now that we have a broadcast pipeline set up and we can push, I wish this would populate so I could show it. And we can have, you know, output to be able to stream through VRCDN, you're going to want to set up your Unity space with specifically, let me just make everything go away. You're going to want to set up your Unity space with this specific layout. So what this is, if I open up Unity, all right, so it's pretty much all that's in that package is just a prefab. I'm going to take and drag this prefab into the world. What this is going to do is this is going to set up the audio sources in the positions that they should be at. And once you have these audio sources in your space, like you'll kind of see here above, I need to add a player, AV Pro. I'm just going to add a generic AV Pro player into this world. I can go to the ArcDSP layout, and we're going to go to the LFE, and down here where it has the video player, I'm just going to select the video player that's in the world, and I just need to do this for every sound source that is in the space. All right, now that I've gone through and I've set all these up, all of the modes should be pre-selected and you should be good to go. But yeah, that's how you get up and running with the Arc Fields preview. And you can do all sorts of crazy stuff with this, like, you know, set up Reaper projects or, you know, whatever projects you want to use that can output multi-channel to go into Fields and, you know, play around with panning your sound sources around in 360 degrees and using the virtual acoustics engine that's inside of it. You could also use the Q jack to take inputs from your actual, you know, audio interface that you might have connected to your device to route it into Arc Fields so that, you know, maybe you want to play the piano or you want to play guitar or something and put on some kind of a concert into VR chat that has, you know, an accurate representation of room acoustics that really truly surrounds people while they're inside of virtual reality. There's kind of limitless opportunities with what you can do with this, and there's still a lot more to go. You cannot save presets. That is the next thing that I am working on putting into the software and getting it up and running. Let me know if you do anything super cool with this and just throw it in the Discord server or put a video out on Twitter or something. You know, it'd be really cool to just kind of see what people end up doing with this. But yeah,